Hello, this is the Ancient and Medieval History Lecture for Friday, the 8th of January, 2021. Where we left things off was we were talking about the society of the early Roman period. We had gone through the geographical nature of the Roman region of the world, and you'll be quizzed on that. You also on Monday have your chapter survey 5 due, and you should expect a quiz on that, on the geography, and also on chapter 5 reading and the homework that you did. The first historical period, and we did the creation myths. The first historical period of Roman history that we're covering is on the period of the Etruscan Monarchy. Remember, the Etruscans were a people who lived north of Rome in what we now call Tuscany, sometimes called Etruria. It is the area basically between the Tiber River northward up to the edge of the Apennine Mountains on the southern fringe of the Po River Valley. Now, while we can't read the writings of the Etruscans themselves, what we can do is learn about them from archaeology, from what they left behind physically, and also from what other people, particularly the Romans, said about them. We also know about the Etruscans from the legacy that they have in Roman culture. Because while Romans are neither purely Latins nor are they purely Etruscans, they have some elements of both and some elements of neither. The Etruscan ways did have legacies within Rome's culture. For example, the Etruscan belief in harrowing, terrifying gods that rip at the souls of the newly dead on their way from this realm to the afterlife, driving them into mad, tattered spirits, led to the creation of gladiator games. Because if condemned men are allowed to fight and kill one another, then the gods are going to be distracted by all these extra dead bodies that or souls that they can rip at, and the honored dead can sneak their way to the afterlife and avoid being an insane, tattered spirit, groaning in anguish. Now, while the Romans, as time went on, viewed gladiator games as more mass entertainment, they never stopped calling them funerary games, games associated with the memorial of some honored dead person, to connect them to the origins of this very strange practice. The second Etruscan holdover in Roman society is augury. Augury is the prediction of the future by observing and interpreting the behavior of birds. Now, that means watching flocks of birds, watching eagles, watching things. And there's a famous story I told you yesterday of the young Emperor Claudius, who stuttered and had all sorts of physical disabilities, and mental disabilities were assumed and was sort of a laughingstock. It's amazing, actually, his family didn't kill him in the Spartan fashion, which a lot of Roman families would have, because he was obviously suffering from disabilities from the earliest age. But there's a day when he's playing with his cousins in the imperial family in a country villa, and their villa is visited by a famous augur, a famous prophet, priest, sibyl type guy. And as he's visiting, the kids come running up, and they're screaming, and one of the adults says, "Silence! You, tell me what's going on." "Well, we were playing, and this eagle, he flew from up high, and then he stooped down and grabbed up this bird, who fought and bit and managed to fight his way free and dropped. And Claudius caught him," and everyone parts, and you see the trembling wolf cub in the hands of the trembling Claudius. The wolf cub is trembling because he's just been through physical trauma. If you've ever seen an animal who's been seriously injured, which is not a happy thing, you know that sometimes they just tremble. They're in such trauma. Well, the wolf cub was bleeding and doing that, but Claudius held on to him. They say, Claudius caught him, Claudius caught him. Can we keep him? And the adults said, well, we'll talk about keeping him first. Let's see if you and the slaves and servants can keep him alive. So the kids, the slaves, and the servants go off to try to work on the wolf cub. And all of the adults' eyes immediately go to the augur. And of course, the augur is going to interpret this. And he says, yes, you're right. This is a very portentous sign. Don't tell anyone about this. And of course, they did, enough for this story to get down. The eagle is destiny. Someday, destiny is going to render Rome, which is clearly the wolf cub, Romulus and Remus thing, unmistakable. Rome is the wolf cub. And someday, Rome will be wretched and needy, desperate like that pup. And that young man is going to save it and nurture it and bring it back to health. And the adults didn't know whether to mock or laugh, because this is Claudius, who can't do anything that a normal man can do, they think, and who is feeble-minded as well as feeble-bodied, they think. Still, the event happened. What none of them could predict is after Augustus's reign and the reign of two emperors who literally purged the entire imperial family, the dour, taciturn Tiberius and the bat-nuts crazy Gaius Caligula, Claudius was one of the only surviving members of the imperial family, certainly of his generation, and he became emperor. And he did manage to stabilize Rome from its troubled state after two emperors that had issues, especially Caligula, and to an extent nurse the Roman Empire back to health. Now, whether you think that that story was just invented after the fact or not is immaterial. The Romans believed in stuff like that, and so did the Etruscans. They believed Don't you miss being here? They believed that the flight of birds was an indication for those who were wise enough to interpret it of what will come, of what will be. So, another form of prophecy is called taking the auspices. Now, taking the auspices is something that was done before armies left for battle, before great battles, before people made important decisions like whether to get married or not. And usually what it involved was the blood sacrifice of an animal. Ancient religion, including ancient Judaism, often focused on the blood sacrifice of animals. Ancient Druidism involved blood right sacrifice of human beings. So did the cult of Baal in the Middle East, and so did several others. Taking the auspices involved the ritual sacrifice, say, of a pure lamb, unblemished and apparently perfect. And what the priest would do as he sliced into the lamb, he would pull out the entrails and look at the organs. And everyone could see what condition those organs were in. And if the organs were in healthy shape, that's a good sign. The auspices are favorable. Let's go out and fight this battle and win. If the organs and the entrails were not, that's a bad sign. Maybe we should just wait until the auspices are right. Hunker down in camp and try not to do anything, because anything done today is sort of doomed. Now, I will tell you that the priests who did these sacrifices were very keen on the feelings of the people that they were leading. And while some may have been, certainly were, true believers, others viewed religion as a form of politics. If you slice open the organs in a certain way of a lamb or whatever you're sacrificing, a goat, if you slice wrongly, you can slice into an organ that will cover everything in bile, in green slime, stinky, like the stuff a person vomits up. So a priest that had an interest in showing good auspices would make darn sure that they wouldn't slice in the way as to cover the organs with bile and with other disgusting smelling and looking substances. If they wanted good auspices, they would make sure to cut cleanly so that the organs would look healthy, if it was a healthy animal. And they would make sure to cut that bilious organ if they wanted a negative outcome, if they wanted the auspices to be, no, we shouldn't do this right now. Now, there were times when a perfectly normal-looking animal, a wonderful, beautiful, perfect, flawless, and faultless-looking animal would have something rotten inside. And in those cases, the priests would prick up their ears and be very, very cautious about what they would say. But in Roman society, Pontifex Maximus, which is the high priest, which is just the very title that the Bishop of Rome, the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, has, which means the source of rivers, a priest being a connection, like a river between two places, the world here below and the world of the gods up above. The Pontifex Maximus was a political office that aristocrats would hold. Remember, church and state in most monarchies, and even in most ancient republics, certainly in Rome's case, went hand in hand. There was no separation quite far from it. Religion was seen as an aspect of politics, and Romans worshipped the so-called patriotic gods. So, gladiator games, augury, taking the auspices. Another thing that comes out of Etruscan sensibilities into Roman religion, and to an extent into Christian observances through the Roman Catholic Church and Greek Orthodox Church, is the notion of ceremonial perfection. And what that means, ceremonial perfection, is lots of bells going up. Can you guess what time of day it is? 3 bells, 5 minutes apart in quick succession? What time of day is it? Anyway, this is the only time of day where that happens. The perfection of a ritual isn't something that can always be guaranteed. If you are not careful, you might spill some wine, you might light the incense the wrong way so that it smokes badly, you might slice the animal wrong when you're doing sacrifices, you might muff a word, you can do all sorts, you might stumble and trip. But the Etruscans believed, and so did later the Romans, and later those who set up Roman Catholic Rite Mass, and to an extent Greek Orthodox, is that the gods demand perfection. They are themselves perfect, and they expect us, when we are engaged in sacred matters, matters separate from the normal world, matters that are wholly separate unto God, or the gods, to also aspire to that same perfection. So, you could go through a 3-hour ritual that would culminate in the sacrificing of a goat. And there's chanting, and there's singing, and there's, which I guess is different, there's the burning of incense, there's the canting of ritual phrases, there's response back and forth. You go through the entire ceremony, you prepare the animal, you prepare the altar, you prepare the knife and everything else. Everything is ritualized. You go through 2 hours and 59 minutes of it. You slice open the animal, and then you place the knife wrongly onto the altar after opening the animal's guts up. But because you've placed the knife wrongly, the ritual is worse than useless. Submitting imperfect work to the gods knowingly is a deeply sinful thing, and it invites curses and calamity and nemesis, and no one wants that. So what is expected is that immediately the old, flawed, fake, bad ritual that had a mistake in it was cleared off, everything, altar cloths, everything cleaned up. The people were cleaned up. They'd strip down, put on different clothes, the priests would. They'd get another goat, and they'd start all over again right away. And it wouldn't be stopped until they got it right. Everything was expected to be perfect. If you devote it to the gods, if you give it to the gods, ceremonial perfection is key. Because in many ways, they viewed the rituals of prayer that they were engaged in as a form of ritual magic. Saying the right words, making the right gestures, burning the right incense, and so forth, all to create a magical effect. And if you screw it up, either you're not going to get a magical effect, you're going to get a waste of time, or you're going to curse yourself and confiscate your goal. So, these ways of being were inherited by Rome and taken in by Rome from the Etruscans. And there was a line of Etruscan kings, culminating in Tarquin. Yes, Tarquin, like the Grand Moff who ran the Death Star in Star Wars before the ending of the first movie. But it's spelled differently. It's not spelled Tarkin and played by Peter Cushing in all of his very severe English, slender, menacing glory. No, this is Tarquin, and Tarquin, Tarquin is known as Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Last, or Tarquin the Bad, or Tarquin the Proud. Tarquin is the last king of Rome, but Tarquin has a knack for creating opposition in the people around him and enmity, and the people of Rome are also sick of being an Etruscan colony ruled by their kings. The people of Rome don't see themselves as Etruscan. So they come together under the slogan, "No kings in Rome," and they drive Tarquin out of power. He is exiled, and he grudgingly accepts the exile and goes off. But he doesn't like it. In any event, Rome is now free of Tarquin. Now, what would normally happen under normal circumstances in most countries is the Romans would choose a king among themselves, or a king would have been revealed by the priests, and Rome would become its own independent monarchy. But the people of Rome, who get rid of Tarquin, insist that what they are after is something new. A place where the people are king. Rex publica. Rex is king, publica are the people, where the people are king. And so Tarquin is the last king of Rome. And one of the most solemn laws of the Roman Republic is also this slogan, "No kings in Rome." Marcus Brutus, Cassius, and the other assassins of Caesar claimed to their dying day that they were following Roman law because they were convinced that Julius Caesar was trying to become king, and they had good reason to think this. And that all they were doing was following the law. Here's the law. No kings in Rome doesn't mean that if you discover that Lucius is bent on becoming the new Rex, the new king, that you have to take Lucius to court and prove it before anything will be done to Lucius. The Romans were practical. They understood that coups can happen, coup d'etat, where government is changed by force or by subversion, not through the proper electoral process. And the law, therefore, allows for anyone to deal, in fact, insists that people deal with this immediately. Now, if immediately you can get Lucius taken off the streets and put into a jail and put on trial for treason for trying to become king, well, do that. But if you genuinely believe that Lucius is out for the crown right now, and that every moment that you wait increases his chance of succeeding at stealing the freedom of the people of Rome, well, you have one responsibility. Kill him! Kill him now! Now, after the fact, you will have to justify your murder of Lucius in a court of law. But if in a court of law you can prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Lucius was trying to become the king, you're not only innocent of any crime, you're a patriot who did your duty. So that's how serious the Romans were about there being no kings in Rome. The Romans did not want to be under the reign of one man, whether he's Tarquin or Brutus or anyone else. They were establishing a place where the people are king, a republic. Now, the Romans had a very, very keen sense of human nature, and they didn't want to tempt anyone too much with power. William Shakespeare once wrote that absolute power corrupts absolutely. That means total power totally corrupts. If you give anyone too much power, it'll change them and maybe destroy any virtue that they have. There's that scene from Lord of the Rings that I may include in the additional materials, where you see Queen Galadriel of Lothlorien being offered the ring by Frodo Baggins, the ring of power, the ring that is going to determine the future of the world. And she knows how dangerous that ring is, but she is tempted in the moment because the allure of total power whispers in her ear, you can make the world right. You are smart enough not to resist, you are smart enough to resist the seductive power of evil, and you can make a world that is fit to live in through the use of the One Ring. A flawed, dangerous MacGuffin that is going to ultimately curse and corrupt everything that you do. Because what you're doing is you are using force, not persuasion, to change the world. And even though you may be beautiful and powerful and terrible and fair, as opposed to the Dark Lord in Mordor that's a basic floating flaming eyeball, yeah, you're more beautiful than he is, but you're still using the same method. You're reaching in and you're trying to be a puppeteer to the people around you. Anyone, the Romans believe, that is given too much opportunity for power, anyone is sooner or later going to succumb to that temptation and try to play God. That is human nature, they argue. So, the Romans consistently dispersed power in their political system rather than concentrate. I'm going to tell you, the most effective form of government in the world is an absolute monarchy with a good king. If you're one of those people that believe that government can be a force for good, and you want a government that's going to go out there and do a whole lot of good, what you want is an absolute monarchy, a government that gives total power to one person, and that person, if they're good and smart and wise, will make laws that change everything and make the society much, much, much better. If you believe government is a force for good, an absolute monarchy with a good monarch is the way to go, because nothing's going to slow them down. Nothing's going to stop them from doing right and doing good. At least as they see doing right and doing good. The Romans didn't trust that. The Romans, like our founding fathers, absolutely feared the power of a tyrannical government, ruled by wannabe gods and wannabe kings and wannabe saviors of the world, people who would use the coercive power of the state to try to build a society of virtue. And that misbegotten notion that you can use the coercive power of the state to make people more virtuous and to make society more perfect has caused a hell of a lot of death over the millennia of recorded history. Most of the time, the great conquerors and tyrants of history see themselves as good because they're using power for what they think is right. There's another way of looking at government. That government which governs best governs least. Government is a necessary evil, necessary to protect us from all enemies foreign, that's what the military is for, and domestic, that's what the laws and the courts and the police are for. To provide enough peace and law and order for civilian life to be born and to exist. That is, life independent from politics, independent from the state, where individuals can make the important choices in their life. That is what government is for, according to people who are suspicious of the coercive power of the state, who do not think it's possible to use the coercive power of the state to truly change hearts and minds and make a truly better society. The Romans were in the latter category. They were suspicious of government, just as our founding fathers were in that latter category. They had rebelled against a tyranny. They did not want to replace it with another tyrannical government. That is why, in the Roman system that you're about to see, and in the American system that we live under, our government is designed not to bring about rapid change. It is designed not to make it possible for one man or one woman to make a difference and change everything. The whole system is designed to slow proposals for change down. I'll talk about our system, and then I'll talk about the Roman system. In the United States of America, the Constitution is designed to separate power. The federal government in Washington, D.C. is only one level of government, and it, according to the Articles of the Constitution, is supposed to limit its power to what the Constitution specifically says it's supposed to do. Deal with international relations, deal with national defense policy, making sure the Constitution remains the law of the entire United States. Those are its basic jobs. Most of the government's jobs should not be carried out by the federal government in Washington. They should be, according to our founders, matters of state government. And the reason for this is that state government is both closer to the people and more limited in scope than the federal government. State government is supposed to be the one that handles social welfare problems, enforcing law and order on society, other than, fighting treason, which the national government can also be involved in. State government is supposed to handle everything from state roads to education and so forth. And the idea the founders had is that by keeping most political decisions at the state level, the federal government won't become too strong. And also, because the state's level is closer to the individual, that people will be able to keep a closer eye on their state governments than they would on a distant government in Washington, D.C. Remember, this is before modern communications. And then below the state government are the local governments. They include everything from town councils to county commissioners. And these local governments handle areas in different localities. And so each level of government is supposed to do something different. The local governments handle things that are very intimate to the local community. The state government handles law and order and basic welfare policy, and the federal government handles national defense, defense against internal enemies that are treasonous, protecting the Constitution, and also making sure that interstate matters and interstate trade are effectively done. But that's not all, because our federal government, at the top level, if you will, is also subdivided. The legislative branch, which is the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, are staffed by people elected to make laws and to change laws. In fact, the House is elected every 2 years, and it's supposed to be the people's house. Every 2 years, a local guy or gal has got to go back to his constituents and say, I'm the right person to represent you in Washington in Congress. Please vote for me. And because of that frequent election, the congressman is not supposed to get too separated from the people that they represent. The Senate was originally set up not to represent the people, and it was not elected by the people. The Senate was originally set up to represent the states, and it was elected, senators were elected by state legislatures. So whoever you elect to represent you in the state house in Boise they're going to be the ones to elect the senators. Why? Because the Senate, which is elected for a 6-year term, was intended to look out for the interests of the states so that the state governments remain strong and the federal government does not become too strong. Since the progressive era 120 years ago, many states, in fact all states now, elect their senators by the people. The state legislatures have been bypassed, and coincidentally, state government power and scope has been reduced significantly since the days when the states elected senators. But that's just the lawmakers, the legislature. Second branch of the federal government is the executive. In wartime, you got to have somebody who's going to be a commander-in-chief. In peacetime, you've got to have somebody who's going to make a consistent, coherent foreign policy. And you also need somebody to take control of the government and be the boss. A committee like the Congress and the Senate can't be. The president is the chief executive officer of the federal government of the United States. He's the commander-in-chief of the national military, and he is also responsible for making sure that the Constitution is the fundament on which everything in government is built. Now, that's a lot of power. And in the American system, the president is given quite a bit of power. But neither lawmakers like the House of Representatives and the Senate that make up the Congress, or executives like the president, who are also elected once every 4 years, not 2, not 6, but 4, they are not the be-all and end-all of government. Because there is one final guardian of the Constitution, which is something that every elected official and every military service member has to take an oath to, not to the people of the United States, not to the flag of the United States, not to the land of the United States, but to the Constitution of the United States. All loyalty is supposed to be to the Constitution of the United States. And the courts, state courts, state Supreme Court, federal district court, United States Supreme Court, the courts are supposed to be the ones that make sure that the laws and the executive policies of the Congress and the president are harmonious with the U.S. Constitution. If they are, the courts will approve and let things happen. If they are not, the courts will declare them unconstitutional, and the law is null and void. And if you want to do something about that, you've got to make a better law that addresses the concerns of the Supreme Court. So, what you have is a system that is designed to slow down change. Let's say you have a big national election where a president, congressional majority, including House and Senate, are set up. The system is designed so that the president and his Congress are going to try to make a bunch of laws. But the interests of House representative members, of senators, and the president, even though they may be of the same party, are not exactly the same. So there's going to be a lot of negotiating and struggle between them. It takes time to make laws. And so even if you pass laws, there are going to be challenges from the people in the courts, challenges from the states in the courts, local courts, district courts, federal appeals courts, and the U.S. Supreme Court. All are going to have to sound off on these new policies. What that really means is that, except in a case of national emergency like war, you don't usually see rapid change in the American political system, because it's going to take you to make real change on a large scale between 6 and 8 years. That is between 3 and 4 congressional terms in the House of Representatives, at least one, maybe into a second senatorial term, at least one, usually more than one presidential term, because our system acknowledges that people can panic and elect the wrong people sometimes, that the people can elect the wrong representatives who are hostile to the Constitution. or who are going to make policy that's so radically different from what we've done before that it might be damaging to our freedom and the Constitution, which is the guarantor of all of that. So our system, by slowing down changes, requires the American people to go to the polls, not just in one big election that transforms everything, but in a series of elections. The first election, then congressional elections 2 years later, then a second presidential election 4 years later, then another congressional election with senators 6 years later, and then the next presidential election of a new president 8 years later and beyond. The idea is that no one is allowed to make immediate rapid change beyond a certain point, because that could go beyond the scope of what the Constitution allows the federal government to do. We slow down change to make sure that the American people, are you sure you want to do that? To make sure that the American people really are bent on this change that some of these politicians are proposing. So they really have to vote again and again and again in order to make these changes stick. That's the way the system is designed. Because it was not designed by people who were for the idea of government, yea, a force for good, but by people who suspected that government was a necessary evil at best, but it was still bleeping dangerous. In the case of the Romans, at the lower level, you have the committee or the assembly of the centuries. And the centuries are the hundreds. They deal with local politics, clan politics, things like that. The assembly of the centuries was the lower part of Roman government, and it dealt with a lot of city government policy. It also was closer to the voter because each of the centuries was a smaller group than the entire Roman people, which is what the Senate dealt with. The Senate is the heart of Rome's government. Unlike ours, that has relatively co-equal branches of the federal government, legislative, executive, and judicial, in the Roman Empire's or Roman Republic's case, the Senate is the heart of everything. The Senate are representatives of the aristocracy and of the people. It depends on the time and place what proportion of them are patricians and what are plebeians. We'll talk about that, but it's basically upper class versus middle class. Now, the Senate makes all laws that pertain to international policy, that is foreign relations, peace and war. The Senate, in general, makes sure that the legions have the equipment that they need to fight. The Senate also makes some laws that are about the way things are going to be done in Rome. For example, Rome didn't allow trucks, their age's version of trucks, which are cargo carts, to go into the city during the daylight. The trucks, therefore, and this is because they wanted to keep, the Roman Senate wanted to keep the streets clear for people to walk and go about their business. So every night, the sound of carts rolling through the stony streets of Rome would wake up Roman citizens and people who live in Rome. But the decision had been made that it was better to have these nocturnal deliveries than it was to disturb the flow of traffic on foot during the daytime. But the Senate cannot guarantee everything. Because in wartime, for example, you need a commander who's going to be personally responsible for how things are done. And there are other things that you need an executive for. This is why we have a president. But the Romans would not trust any single man with the executive power, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. So they appointed 2 consuls with roughly equal powers. Now, these consuls, what they did is in peacetime, they were the executives who convened the Senate and things like that. They ran meetings. But in war times, they commanded the legions. But this is how much they needed to agree with one another. Every other day, command was shifted from one consul to the next. This arrangement and its weirdness particularly comes out during the Second Punic War. This is the second great war between Rome and Carthage, when the Carthaginian general Hannibal is in Italy kicking Roman butt. And in the years after a great Roman defeat at a place called Cannae, there were different schools of thought about how to deal with this apparently unstoppable Hannibal fellow. Well, a guy named Fabius is elected to the consulship. So is somebody else. Now, the somebody else wants to get to grips with Hannibal as quickly as possible, fight another battle, and erase the stain of the Roman defeated Cannae. But but Fabius says, no, if we, with the armies we have, get anywhere near that guy, he's going to destroy them. No. What we should do is we should basically stay near enough to him to mess with his supply lines, near enough to him that he can't really relax, close enough to him that within a couple of days we can grapple with him if we need to, but far enough away so that if he turns towards us, we can move away. We will be an army in being. We will harass him. We will mess with his supplies. We are not going to confront him in an open battle if we can possibly help it. The disagreement with the two consuls was so great that on those days when the aggressive, let's fight Hannibal now, was in power, the army would march as quickly as they could towards Hannibal. The next day, when Fabius, who became known as Cunctator, or frustrator of Hannibal and of other Romans, was in power, the army would march as quickly as it possibly could away from Hannibal. Neep, 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 neep. Hannibal's over here. For an entire year, this goes on. Because the Romans didn't trust anyone. Not anyone with too much power, because absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, the Romans did comprehend how dangerous it was for there to be no single authority. That if there is a real national crisis, an emergency, a state of emergency must be declared. And the Roman Senate has a law for this. It's called the law of the dictator. Dictator is he who commands. It's he who tells people what to do. It's he who tells people what to do, he who dictates orders. So the dictator is going to run Rome under these terms. Their power is absolute. If the dictator orders the people of Rome during a crisis to wear purple hats with floppy ears and feathers on Tuesday, then Romans will wear purple hats with floppy ears and feathers every Tuesday. Anyone who doesn't is a criminal. But they only have power for 6 months, or until the duration of the crisis, whichever is shorter. 6 months or shorter if the crisis is solved by then. And after their term of office, they can be sued in court for violating the Constitution that Rome had, for violating the law. So as a dictator, while you can make everyone hop on their left foot, calling each other Susan and wearing the purple floppy-eared hat with pink feathers on it, after the crisis or after the 6 months, whichever comes first, you're going to have to account to that. If people sue you over that as a violation of the Constitution, and it is, then you're going to have to defend it. So, yes, in certain cases of national emergency, the Romans would give a dictator total and unlimited power. But there were balances against that. Very short term and absolute legal accountability after their term is done. Now I'm going to tell you about the world's greatest dictator. Nope, not Mao Zedong of communist China. He's the world's greatest mass murderer. Not Joseph Stalin. He's the communist dictator of Russia during the 30s and 40s. No, he's the world's second greatest mass murderer. Not Adolf Hitler of National Socialist Germany. No, he starts World War II, and he's the world's third greatest mass murderer. But no, none of them. The greatest dictator in the world is Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus, who our city Cincinnati is named after, is the Roman who does the best possible job of dictatorship I've ever heard of. Cincinnatus. During a time of crisis, retired Cincinnatus is working on his turnip farm out in the fields covered in mud and muck, fertilizer and earth. And a group of senators shows up in their beautiful white togas, and they plead with him, Cincinnatus, we need your help. The realm, the republic is invaded. The Senate has voted to make you dictator, to drive out the barbarians. And in so many words, with a piece of wheat in his mouth, King Leonidas goes, yeah, yeah, yeah. And he walks out of the field and gets on his horse and heads to the army. Trains up the army for a few weeks, meets the enemy in battle, crushes them. And just as the battle is ending, when it's clear that the enemy is destroyed, is toast, he turns to his generals and the other senators and says, well, I'm done now. Back to the farm. And he leaves. You may have heard the expression that the height of good manners is knowing when to leave. Well, King Leonidas knows when to leave. He has no interest in power. That's the kind of man you want in power. You don't want a guy who's, I'm going to have power, unlimited power. No. You want somebody who is, in fact, not personally lusting after power. Well, King Leonidas not only didn't act like a power-mad, vainglorious narcissist, the moment he could possibly give up power, he did. Best dictator in human history, without a doubt. And this is why when George Washington was offered the throne of the United States at the end of the American Revolution, Washington says no. Then they said, okay, well, why don't you be dictator? And he says no. Well, why don't you be president for life? And he says no. Why don't you be head of the Church of the United States? And he says no. Why don't you run for president for a 4-year term and other people will after you? And he says, okay. He is the American King Leonidas. He's also our most important president because all he had to do was to say yes, and he would have been king or dictator or president for life, and we would not have the system we have now. If he had said yes to being head of the Church of the United States, even more so. So George Washington is the American King Leonidas. He does what he needs to do, but nothing else in terms of acquiring this kind of personal power that so many lesser men crave. Now, I'm going to flash ahead a little bit. Patron-client relationships, item F. We left things off on item B for King Leonidas. So now we're going to F. In the Roman society, a patron is someone who's usually older, more experienced, who has money and power to spare and needs loyal followers. A client is somebody who it may be young and energetic, but desperately needs money and the influence of power. So they come together like the two poles of a magnet want to. The patron swears loyalty on a personal level. The client swears personal loyalty on a level of without limit to the patron. And the patron promises to lead and guide the client and provide for his needs. So the patron-client relationship is a way of doing business where if you are young and in need of help, you pledge your loyalty to a powerful, wealthy fellow who is willing to use some of that power and wealth on your behalf in return for your absolute loyalty. And when I say absolute loyalty, I mean absolute loyalty. Patron-client relationships are the way business is done around many parts of the world. And our Anglo-Saxon sensibilities that you shouldn't let personal affairs affect your governmental role disdain this. This sort of politics of connections, politics of, who do you do business with, politics of who's related to who, politics of backdoor deals and secret good old boy networks and all that stuff. That's the way business is done in Italy today. It's the way business has been done in Italy since Roman times, maybe since before Roman times. It's also the way a lot of business is conducted in Japan, in Russia, and elsewhere. The patron offers his patronage, his money, power, support, and guidance. The client offers his loyalty as a foot soldier. Now, to show you what this looks like in practice, I'm going to show you, in the second clip, the introduction to the movie The Godfather. Now, while this movie takes place just after World War II in New York and involves a Sicilian crime boss named Vito Corleone, who's being approached by a potential client, an undertaker named Bonacera. This scene, in all of its detail, reflects what happens in Roman society when a potential patron and a potential client comes together. We'll talk more about this on Monday. Remember, Chapter Survey 5 and a quiz on Greek geography and also on the homework is going to happen Monday. Watch the other videos. Have a good day.